Well, thank you all for being here. My question to you is, how many people here think that failure is beneficial? Beneficial. Okay, some of you. Looks like I'm going to have to keep talking. I believe failure is so beneficial that it might not even exist in humanity. Tonight's theme is being human. We're going to discuss how being human relates to failure. And we're also going to talk about how responding to failure helps to define our humanity. If anyone is currently thinking that failure doesn't relate to humanity, I humbly plead you to remember the famous saying that is always offered as a justification for failure. I'm only human. We will start by looking at the opposite of failure, success. We will then move into defining failure itself, and then we will finish with discussing the responses to perceived failure. Especially, I'm focusing on how important forgiveness is in that process. Success. Success is defined in Webster's dictionary as a degree or measure of succeeding, favorable or desired outcome. Also, the attainment of wealth, favor, or eminence. Would you guys agree that success is a part of being human? Yeah. We all strive for favorable or desired outcomes, right? We all have a list of things to accomplish and we set out to do them. And I'm sure that on most people's lists are items that we as a culture would generally say are successful if we were to accomplish them, such as the attainment of wealth, favor, or eminence, right? Furthermore, almost nobody in this room puts at the top of their list, fail at insert noun here today, right? Now everyone here has a different specific measure of what success is, to what degree they aspire to, and accomplishing that degree helps to define part of our humanity. In fact, it helps so much in this defining process that when we do not achieve our degree of perceived success, we begin to think negatively of ourselves. We then begin to become sad, frustrated, angry. We then begin to characterize ourselves as unworthy or useless. And then what's more, because of this cycle that starts to happen, we then begin to act in negative ways, which create more negative thoughts, feelings, actions, and none of this generally serves in assisting us with achieving our level of success. What's more is, as we go through this vicious cycle, we begin to think of ourselves in a very, very negative light, and we begin to take our existence as a negative thing instead of a positive thing. It leads to a lot of the depression problems we see today with the youth, right? But there's something else that helps to define part of my humanity and part of your humanity. And I propose along with many others that it does so to a greater degree than success. In fact, according to Bill Gates, success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking that they can't lose. Bill Gates is a pretty smart guy, would you say? Failure. By now, most of you have noticed my attire and are thinking, well, if failure exists, wearing worn, torn, and old baggy sweats on a TEDx stage is a classic example of it. Would you agree? It's probably not the best TED speaker outfit ever. Allow me to explain my outfit and my experience with failure. But first, what is failure? Each one of us is going to define that term based on how we think about, categorize, or identify a failure. Some could blandly say that it is the absence of success. Because I failed to reach goal A or point X, I have failed. Others could define it as being the negative consequences of decisions and actions. And Webster's defines it as a deficiency or total defect, omission, non-performance, a decay or defect from decay. Now clearly when speaking of physical properties, as Grant did earlier this evening, the term failure has a specific meaning with negative connotation, and it is not at all desired. For example, the rocket failure caused the deaths of the astronauts that day. The sole cause of death was the parachute's failure. And the failure of the ship's engine led to its demise. But when applying the term failure to humanity, the definition of the term only takes on the specificity of the perspective of the person defining it. It doesn't require a negative connotation, and in fact, it should be something that is desired, if it even truly exists in humanity. Looking at the first couple of definitions from Webster's, the term failure leads me to think that because I have failed to reach goal A or point X, I am therefore a failure, deficient, or defective. But we all know that that's not okay to say to someone. Or it leads me to think that because my decisions and actions had negative consequences, I have failed. But decisions and actions are not omissions or non-performance. So the second part of the definition does not adequately describe these facets of life either. Defining failure as such causes the majority of us to have negative thoughts about our humanity, our characters, our personalities, our abilities, etc. These negative thoughts lead to negative behaviors and so on and so on. The same cycle that we see when we do not reach our expected level of success. Now, instead of just defining away failure by the use of semantics, instead of just saying that it doesn't exist, I will lean on anecdotal, factual, and experiential evidence to bolster my assertion, such as quotes from famous people, facts of perceived failures actually turning out to be great successes, and my experience and response to failure. It's really hot in here. I should not have worn these sweats on this stage. But failure doesn't exist, so it doesn't really matter, right? For anecdotal evidence, I turn to Bruce Lee, who said that defeat is a state of mind, and no one is ever defeated until defeat is accepted as reality. He's a pretty smart guy, right? And Miles Davis, who stated, do not fear mistakes. There are none. That's a good one too. Or Stephen Covey, I am not a product of my circumstances. I am a product of my decisions. And finally, one of my favorite quotes, because it came to me from somebody that's here tonight. It doesn't matter how you start this life or what happens in the middle of it, but it does matter how you end. Scott Richards. Finding factual evidence to bolster the claim that failure might not really exist is easy. Notice the response of Thomas Edison, the man who failed thousands of times to create a working light bulb, when asked a question on this topic by Walter S. Mallory. Is it a shame that with the tremendous amount of work you have done, you haven't been able to get any results? Edison turned on him like a flash with a smile and replied, results? Why, man, I've got tons of results. I know thousands of ways that things don't work. Or Michael Jordan, who failed to make the high school varsity team. I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot, and I've missed. I have failed over and over and over again, and that is why I succeed. And finally, some more factual, although mixed with experiential evidence that failure in humanity might not even exist. My life. You all know me as Bikram, Mishra, or Bick, but there's another identifier that some know me as. CDOC number 138649. Now, I'm not your average convicted felon. No. I'm a convicted murderer. Yeah. And these are my prison sweats. I brought them with me when I left prison just over a year ago. In case number 06CR2775, I was tried for first-degree murder and found guilty of the lesser second-degree murder. For all intents and purposes, I think it's safe to say that on the day of my conviction, I believed that because I did not reach goal A, or I did not achieve point X, that I had failed. Furthermore, I believe that because my decisions and my actions led to the death of another human being, I had failed. Now, would everybody agree that by the common definitions held by humanity, I had failed massively, and more so than most people we know? And yet today I stand here at TEDx in Winter Park in front of all of you in these sweats, in these hot lights, sweating, telling you that I do not believe that failure exists really and truly in humanity. Let me explain. Our response. Going back to Stephen's quote that I am not a product of my circumstances, I am a product of my decisions. And pointing to all the other quotes mentioned at this point, there's a component to our humanity that takes away failure's sting, our response to it. Not accepting defeat, not fearing mistakes, not playing victim to circumstances, and ending differently than we started are all responses. And as Edison and Jordan have pointed out and demonstrated, choosing our response can lead to positive results and success. This reminds me of another quote. Within each decision lies all of the power in the world. Me. You see, how we respond to perceived failure, including the forgiveness we show ourselves and others, helps to define our humanity. The point that our response has huge learning and growth benefits is what turns a perceived failure into just another step in the process of succeeding. I believe that there are 4 stages to an appropriate response: acceptance, forgiveness, examination, and correction. Let's look at acceptance. Stage 1 in the various steps to grief is denial. Who's been through grief? It's rough. I didn't even think I killed a guy at first. That's how much I was in denial. Ironically, step 1 in a famous step program is to first admit that we have a problem. When we make a mistake or fail, some of us are grief-stricken, and others experience just a brief moment of sadness. Either way, we tend to deny the reality that something is wrong and that we are responsible for it. What happens next sets the stage for the rest of our response. If we move straight to blame shifting, we are not going to accept the reality that we have a certain level of responsibility in the failure. It's okay to look at the actions of others and analyze what role they played, but we must first look at ourselves, the decisions we made, and the actions we produced in order to learn a great deal about ourselves. This is acceptance. Then, once we have humbled ourselves, we can move to forgiveness. I want to really focus on forgiveness, as it is quite possibly the greatest or hardest step to an appropriate response to perceived failure. And it sets the stage for the rest of our current and future responses. Forgiveness is defined by my buddy Webster as the act of forgiving, the pardon of an offender by which he, she, they, or it is considered and treated as not guilty. That includes yourselves. Don't be so hard on yourselves. Forgiveness involves forgiving ourselves and others for the failures that we have perceived to have taken place. This is where the rubber meets the road in the how of rebounding from failures. This is because without it, we cannot get to the right mindset to form an unclouded view of what happened and why, for the purpose of analyzing the components of the failure and creating appropriate correction. It is so easy to get caught in a vicious cycle of blame and pity, blame and pity. Once locked into this cycle, we won't be capable of seeing that there are things we can do to improve the outcome the next time around. This is huge. There is nothing to be learned from harboring anger towards a fellow human being. It actually hurts us more emotionally, mentally, and physical than the person we're harboring it against, even towards the most vilest of offenders, like me. Now let's be real. This is all easier said than done. But I'm certain that if a convicted murderer can forgive himself and the world around him, that anybody in this room can do it. This extension of forgiveness to ourselves and others does something in our minds. It frees us from the feelings of guilt, shame, anger, sadness, and others. It moves our thinking away from the emotional response and into the logical thought processes towards a more objective and rational state of mind. This real learning comes from objectively examining the situations we were in and the involvement of others to determine not necessarily what they did wrong for blaming purposes, but more what they did wrong that we didn't like and that we allowed to be a catalyst or deciding factor for our response. It is here that the true nuggets of wisdom are found. Finally, the last step of correction, where growth occurs to the extent that we utilize the learning to engage in new action, even if we make the same mistake twice. In this step, we simply begin implementing the corrective thought, patterns and decisions and actions that we believe will lead to a more favorable outcome in a similar situation at some future point in time. Be easy on yourself. This is not a linear process. You will take one step forward just to take 2 steps back, and sometimes even 3. But as long as after time you see improvement, then you're clearly moving towards success as you would define it. Once I accepted the fact that I killed another human being, I was able to recognize my responsibility. Once I recognized my responsibility, I was able to start on the path of forgiving myself. Once I forgave myself, I was able to extend that forgiveness to others. And as I began examining my life and learning from my decisions and actions, it really opened that door. This learning led to corrective action, and while I was incarcerated, I studied and earned an associate's, a bachelor's, and a master's degree, and I was looking forward to beginning work on my doctorate. I applied to 5 of the 7 Ivy League institutions to get my PhD in business. All 5 of them denied me. I taught, trained, led, and mentored inmates from all walks of life in various subjects and learning experiments, ranging from psychology to financial education. And I gained recognition from humans in every facet of my life for these successes. All of this stemmed from my biggest failure in life. I did not realize how hot it was going to be. I'm from Colorado. This is Florida. Conclusion. So does failure even exist in humanity? One can say it does if you respond inappropriately. What solidifies an experience as a failure is a horrible response to it. In this viewpoint, essentially, failure doesn't exist until you are no longer able to choose your responses, which for most of us is on our deathbed. However, I want to be clear that my thought is that it can be taken even further and said that failure as defined by Webster and as viewed by the majority of us in this room is not deficient or defective thing in humanity at all, but just another obstacle in the process of or stepping stone to success. This thought is bolstered by the fact that our emotional response to not meeting our expected level of success is the same vicious cycle as looking at something as a failure. So it's really that not achieving our expectations can put us in that cycle, not failure. And besides, even if you choose to respond horribly and you act on it, both being commissions and performance, then you have succeeded in this response. And the consequences are merely the result of your success. As in the case of Edison, remember that he spent countless hours trying to do something that continually yielded failures, and yet he succeeded. And where there is success, failure doesn't exist, right? I will leave you here to ponder this question, and I challenge you to do so. If right now you feel like booing me off a stage, please remember, I'm only human. Thank you, guys.